Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unstoppable Product. Hello, Warren. How are you today?
I'm good. Good like every day, of course.
Fantastic. You ready to talk to your audience about the second bucket of the Low-Risk Reinvention, which is our main framework that helps drive, let's say, change management and behavioral change when someone needs to adopt a new product, which means you can get more sales by following this framework. So today
Yep.
is about talking and showing examples of the second bucket of this mental model, the low risk reinvention. For all the audience, we want to remind you that in the last chapter, we introduced these concepts, the low risk reinvention. And after introducing it, we were talking about the elements of assurance, which are
Right.
Warren. What are those elements of assurance? How do they help to
Yeah.
make more choices?
Lower risk. Yeah, so that particular, I'll call it a pillar or a foundation of low risk is what some people call the ecosystem. And just to remind everyone that when we think about reducing the perception of risk and we talk about different
Mhm,
elements, this is segment specific.
mhm,
So last time we talked about the ecosystem that supported publishing and books, and it was related to Amazon and how
mhm,
they leveraged a very strong established ecosystem
mhm,
called book
right?
publishing, and people were able to feel extremely safe in engaging, even though it was a novel method of purchase and delivery. The the low risk element was huge, was
Mhm.
just huge. In that case, the segment was book publishing. And in many of our examples, you'll see that we are being very segment specific.
That was last chapter, assurance elements, the six elements of assurance. Today we're going to talk about affinity.
Yeah.
What is the affinity bucket
Yeah.
and how does it help to reduce the risk perception of buying a new high tech?
So there's an element of human behavior, and we call it affinity, and it's how well you can show that you understand someone else. How deeply are you connected? How can you, in many ways, prove that you see the world from their perspective? And when you can literally show elements of a product offering
Mm.
that says, "Hey, look, I see the world from the customer's point of view. I know exactly what your issues are. I know what your workflow looks like. I know what it's like to be you." We have exceptionally strong affinity. And if you do that really well, your product sells itself.
So that's the bucket.
Yep.
And we're going to talk and give examples about six different elements or factors that we have within this bucket of affinity. One element is trusted channels. You can sell through trusted channels.
Yep.
The second element is value alignment. How are you alignment? How is your product offering aligned with the
Yes.
way that your customer sees the value? The third element is evaluation and integration support. It's not only about your product, but how are you supporting in the decision making process of who to buy from, what to buy, and how to integrate with their current systems.
Yep.
The fourth element is trial before commitment, which means I want to try this before committing to purchase. Show me the value before I make the big investment because
Yep.
this is way too risky. The fifth element is workflow compatibility, which means how is your product adapting to the current workflow, or does it have to change a lot of different workflow parts in the end user's side, which means the more workflow change, the more disruption, the more risk perception. So the better you fit into that workflow, the less risky to buy your product. And the sixth element is familiar.
Right.
So Warren,
Yep.
where do
Okay.
we start?
Yeah. Okay. So in my mind, a great place to start is with a phrase called domain expertise. And
Mhm,
The thing that maybe you've heard it said before, that whenever you as a business leader can create a solution to a problem that you have had yourself, and the other way to phrase it is the founder is the customer.
mhm,
Guess what? If you create something for a problem that you have personally, you know it as well as anyone else, right? That's why, say, Airbnb was successful is because they knew what it was like to have extra space. They needed to rent that out. They knew what all the issues were. They were creating a solution for themselves.
mhm,
And the same thing for the company called Zappos. They wanted to find shoes and they couldn't find the shoes they liked, so they created an online e-commerce capability,
mm,
and they knew all of the dimensions of the problem so they could solve every single one. And that's the key. When you're solving something for yourself, you've got 100% affinity. Everything there is to know. Problem 1, problem 2, problem 3, problem 4. And this is what we've noticed, I'll say, as an issue, is if you are a founder or if you're in high tech and all you do is you go and just have some conversations with the customer or the prospective customer, they will generally just talk about their problem at the highest level.
mm,
They don't tell you all of the details. What's problem at level 2, problem level
yeah.
3, problem, right? So you don't get to hear that in just having a conversation. That's why what you create doesn't have all of the elements of low risk that we call affinity, is because you haven't lived through the problem yourself. And but anyhow, so that's the foundation of the affinity piece, is the
Mhm,
better
I get it.
somebody, the happier the product
It's
experience will be.
affinity to your buyer, affinity to your end user, affinity to what we call the decision making unit, right? Whoever
Yep.
is making the decision of buying your product, you want
Yes.
to have the affinity mentioned.
And the first piece of the affinity pillar or foundation of low risk we call familiar, and it's what we talked about actually last time, which is a great example, is everyone knew what a book was. It was 100% familiar when Amazon went into business and they went in and essentially decided to enter the market. They did it with something so familiar,
Mm,
everybody understood what it was. There was no question about what a book is, what it looks like. It was 100% familiar.
mhm,
And that's the ideal scenario. Now, there are other examples, and there's actually one that I'll use probably throughout this, the different pieces. But so I had a chance a number of years ago to help a company, a startup,
mhm,
create a digital audio workstation for broadcast. And it was that perfect situation, absolutely perfect, where the founder was the customer. So the founder of this company worked in radio broadcast. He had
mhm,
been on the air with his own radio show for about 20 years, and he had a serious problem, and that was he needed to be able to capture people who would call to his show, and he needed to capture, edit, and replay audio with lightning speed. And it was done essentially with old style tape, reel to reel tape, and they used to actually cut it into pieces and tape it back together. He was able to create an interface that looked exactly like the old method of reel to reel. And you could move the little pieces of tape around, you could cut them up. And what that did was it met the first two elements of affinity, both extremely familiar just through the interface and what you would see, and the workflow,
mm,
because he knew that most of the people in radio broadcast, they play a commercial and they have maybe 30 seconds to talk to someone, capture the audio, edit the audio, put it back together and get it ready to play. And you've got 30 seconds to do that. And so he mastered that because
Mhm,
he knew every element of that workflow.
mhm,
He knew every element of the old method.
and that worked.
And it's essentially an industry standard today. In fact, it's called Vox Pro, and
Okay.
it's essentially in thousands and thousands of radio broadcast studios around the
Mhm,
world. It is the worldwide
cool.
standard. Yeah.
So before we jump to the next element, I want to keep digging about this family element if you want, because to me, inside familiar, it's also familiar user experience, right? For example, we came across some clinical trial companies and we've learned that they are still using a lot of papers, right? So you gotta scan the paper to get the data and then OCR and then introduce all that data in a data management
Yeah.
platform and all of that. So here is the big thing when at some point familiarity switches to the new thing, right? And
Yeah.
then we can see this market that is switching to a paperless. At some point, you get to think about, okay, my product also is getting outdated because the new familiar thing is to go paperless, right? But
Yeah.
if most of your market is still using paper, familiar user experience is still using paper, right?
Right.
So you want to keep very connected with the user experience that is commonly used in the market and fit with that user experience, right? That's familiar.
Absolutely. And that's an interesting point that you're bringing up. If we use the example of Amazon, now a hardcover book is probably not going to change. There will still be books. They will look the same for they have looked the same for 100 years. They'll look the
Yeah,
same for another 100 years. There's not
I bet.
really much change in that particular segment. But what you're referring to is a segment in clinical trials where there
Mhm,
is change, absolutely. And that is part of maintaining the perception of low risk is if you essentially help enable your customers make that transition as it takes place. And I know in clinical trials there still is, and in healthcare a lot of organizations still using fax. They
mhm,
send
yeah, yeah.
it's and so you need to think about in that particular segment, some have already moved beyond fax, some still use fax, and you have to maintain that familiarity as you move forward
Mm,
with the market segment. You have to
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
You want to keep the alignment, the
right.
affinity alignment, right?
Yes.
And so the next element is very related with this is end user workflow, and it's how you consume your product and how does it integrate in the end user workflow.
And again, in the radio broadcast example, the workflow was perfect because it was 100% set up for the broadcast studio. The little control panel was extremely familiar, very much like the old method. All of the audio interface was designed for the old methods, for things that were already in place. So the entire user experience, it just felt like, hey, I've already done this before. It doesn't require big changes of behavior. It does
Mm,
not require really much new learning at all. The workflow, how you essentially, in the example, how you answer the phone stays the same. How you speak to the person stays the same. You're capturing what they say, you're editing your audio clip and replaying it, and how you interact with all of the other broadcast equipment stays the same. So there's virtually no change in workflow,
yeah.
and that's huge. That is huge.
an example that is it doesn't come with so many implications, right? But this is a software example. We use Breakthrough Innovation to record our customer calls, our market research calls. Use Fathom AI, which is an artificial intelligence note taker. And I remember in the early days, which is not that much, long ago, it just was probably 8 months ago when I was testing the different tools that we could use for this purpose. There were tools that we were using Zoom by that time. So our workflow was Zoom in a call, and then we record it, then we download it, then we do the market research by listening, the recording, and then we do all the manual work and put it in our research tool. We find patterns and so on, right? And by that time, there were very good tools, actually with better artificial intelligence embedded, that were highlighting key elements, finding patterns in real time in the calls, right? I remember one of those tools. But I ended up picking Fathom AI, and it was because of just one single reason. All those more advanced tools, they were coming with their own recording, let's say video call software. So you
Yep.
had to switch from Zoom to their video call software. And I didn't pick those tools just because I had to make my clients change. So think this is how your clients also think. This is not just me. We also think this way when picking a new tool, right? My way of thinking was okay, all my clients, I get clients by jumping on a call. I do the discovery call, I do the sales call, I solve questions, and then I close the sales and I get new clients. They all are familiar with Zoom. If now I tell my prospective clients to jump into a new tool that is not going to work because they don't know it, I can lose clients. So
Yep.
it's huge risk for me. Don't
Yes.
make me change the tool that all my clients know. I'm not going to take that risk. I would rather use an artificial intelligence that is not that much risky, but even though it's, let's say, worse in the sense of detecting patterns, but
Yep.
it's less risky.
Yep. Absolutely. And we've talked about this, I think, before. That is the exact reason that so many people are avoiding electric vehicles is the workflow change that is required is so big. It's well, you have to learn how to plug it
Mm,
in. You have to learn how long to plug it in. You do this sometimes at home. Sometimes you do it when you're out on the road, you have to plug it in. You have to find new places to plug it in. The whole workflow changes. And that's why electric vehicle adoption is just struggling in many
yeah.
places. Early adopters, they're okay with it, but the mainstream is saying, "No, I don't wanna change that much." That they don't use the word workflow, but that's what it is.
It's how you consume the product,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and
I got a
and
friend.
yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna say that I have a friend talking about the electric vehicles, and then we jump to the next element because otherwise we'll run out of time. And just 2 weeks ago, we were having this conversation, and he goes, "I have an hybrid vehicle," and I was, "All right, but why did you buy a hybrid vehicle and not just switch to the electric one?" And then he goes, "It's just peace of mind because
yeah,
electric vehicle is cool. I would like to switch. I would like to help with climate change and all of that. But if I get out of range, I don't know because I have a cell phone and my cell phone, when it's at 10% capacity, sometimes it just switches off. What if I am driving and I'm at 10% capacity, it switches off? What am I gonna do? There are gas stations all over the place,
yeah,
but there are no chargers all over the place. So it's peace of mind. I know that if I'm running out of battery, I have my gas
yeah,
and I have gas stations.
yeah, and
Again,
that's
risk.
it is, and you continuously that's why we call it reinvention, is you really are always looking for ways to lower the perception of risk. There are
Yeah.
many different possible ways. You don't have to be perfect in all of them. If you can lower risk perception, then you automatically start to gain new customers.
And trial before commitment is a great way, right?
Oh, it is absolutely the and
It's magic.
it is, and that is the element behind the entire success, really, in my mind, of the SaaS model is what that does when you've got cloud-based services and things that you can let people try it before they buy it. It's a massive risk reduction. And it's not like the old days, right? Where you had to buy some software, you had to take it back to your location, you had to install it, and that took a lot of time and training and effort. And then you find out whether or not it's a good purchase or
Yeah.
it is. And yeah, and but when I'm currently working with a client, and that's one of their advantages. They have a medical device, but it's very low cost, very simple to use, and our approach is essentially going to be try before you buy. And by just letting people take this device, put it on, watch the data for a while, see if it's helpful, and that's a very unique
Mm.
capability in the medical device industry, but it's got tremendous power anywhere.
And talking about software examples, also about trial before commitment. And here is in software, typically you have these models, freemium models and trial models, right? There are different models.
Yep,
Premium is you have a pricing plan which is free, it's limited, but it's free forever.
yep,
And then with the trial plan model, what you have is probably 15 days to 30 days of trialing, and then you have to pay. Otherwise, you don't have any more access, right?
yes,
Here, and I'm not just talking here as an, let's say, someone who knows in the field, but also as an end user, right? When I am working with a trial before commitment or with a trial pricing plan, it's very important that your trial phase the real value for the end user. If your trial is not long enough to show the value to the end user and to your buyer, that's not going to reduce the risk perception enough because they won't realize the value. They cannot compare the value versus all the risks that they are taking. So
yep,
what that means, in my case, I struggle. It's not that I struggle. It's that I like to try very different tools. And you suffer that, Warren, a lot. Because I'm always saying, hey, try this tool, right?
right,
To
yeah,
work together, to collaborate. And
yeah,
sometimes I try tools and they give me 15 days trial or 2 weeks trial. And then after 2 weeks, sometimes I start with the tool. And then once I start with the tool, I realize that I need to learn more than I would have thought. So it's workflow change, it's behavioral change, and I'm good with that. The point is that when I have to spend so much time in changing the way I approach this workflow for this new tool, I need more time to fit with my schedule. I am busy, I have clients, I have the podcast,
yeah,
I have plenty of stuff to do. So your tool here, SaaS founder, your tool is not the only thing I do in my day. So if you are asking me to change things, to change my behavior, the way I approach a workflow, you're gonna provide me enough time. So what happened is that I say to myself, okay, this is taking too much of my time. I will hold, and when I have more time, I will come back. Because remember, the default for every one of us is to stay as we are. That's
yeah,
the less risky decision. Default is status quo. Status quo will always win you, right? So you're gonna
yeah,
make it easy for me. Now,
yes,
what happens is that the trial ends before I have a chance to change my behavior, to try it, and to see the value that you are
y-
providing. So at
yeah,
the end of the day, I am okay. I'm not going with this tool because the trial has ended. They want to charge me. I don't know the value that they are going to provide me because they didn't give me enough time to realize the value. So
yep,
whenever you are doing a proof of concept, whenever you are doing a freemium, not freemium because freemium is forever, a trial period, provide enough time to the end user to understand what's the value you provide
yep,
and support because the support, the videos, the onboarding accelerate that learning process.
yep,
Otherwise, make it longer.
absolutely. And it's interesting as you are speaking of these examples, there's a competitive element. in the trial approach. For example, I was eavesdropping. I was listening in to a conversation where people were talking about website development. They want to
Okay.
have better contact forms on their website,
Okay.
and there are various vendors that do
Tons.
contact forms, lots and
Tons.
lots. Okay. The WP forms and contact form 7 and gravity forms and on,
Even
right?
HubSpot. Yeah.
Yeah, so all of these different options. Guess what? Some of those don't offer any free or trial at all. So, well, you're basically saying from a competitive point of view, we're not going to show affinity with the end user, and we're
Mhm.
not going to enable try before you buy in any way whatsoever. Yet all of the other competitors do it. And wow,
Yeah, they are saying they don't care.
they're saying they don't care. That's right.
Yeah. We came across products that are really hard to make a trial before commitment. But I have to say, I've been marketing products of over 100,000 tickets. That's a lot of money. It's high risk, a lot of disruption, but you can figure out ways. Like, for example, we came out with a way which was a pilot of 20K. Okay, instead of 100K all or nothing, which was 99% no's, I'm not gonna
Right.
buy this.
Yeah.
We came out with a way to provide a pilot for 20K. And
Yep.
then if you move on with the pilot, then we would discount the 20K from the license of the
Yep.
100K,
Yep.
right? So at the end of the day is the 100K, but the risk, you're taking 20% of risk thinking about the pricing point. And the pilot, instead of going all in with a rollout, you're testing with a small group of people in a more controlled way.
Yep.
So we were dramatically reducing the risk and actually also the time to value because it was okay, you get all in, time to value 6 months. Now the pilot is 3 weeks, small
Mm.
group, right? And just
Yep.
20K. So dramatically reduce the risk perception and the
Yep.
closing rates were way, way higher.
Yep.
So there are always ways for the listeners. If you think that there is no way to provide a trial before commitment, I can tell you there are always ways, no matter how
Yep.
complex if you is your product.
Absolutely.
And if you don't came out with a way, just talk to us. We can help.
Yes. And yeah, we can find that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's jump to the next element because we've
Okay.
got 15 minutes more.
Okay.
Which one do you want to talk? We're missing value alignment, trusted channels, and evaluation and integration support.
Okay. Okay. So we'll just go to the next one, which is supporting evaluation
Yeah.
and
Because it's
and
very related with
y-
what we're talking. Yeah.
it is. And the thing that I think is really powerful about offering support, and it's really before, during, and after the sale, is there are a lot of organizations that they just don't have any confidence in their ability to buy a new technology or integrate a new technology. And if you are willing, through offering services or training or support of some kind, consulting, if you are able to just help them through the journey, that provides them as a way to get past their lack of self-confidence. Now, here's the other thing that this does is this really will compress a sales cycle too. Is if a client, a bigger organization says, "Look, this particular vendor will help us plan before purchase. They will help us make the purchase and integrate the product, and they will support us afterwards," then that customer doesn't have to go to different sources.
Mhm.
They don't have to go to different places to find what they need. They get it all from you, one
So the
place, and so they buy faster.
so they are so the salespeople in this case are basically educating the client to
And
make the right choice, and then show them and execute a game plan to adopt internally the technology.
yeah,
Means
and
okay, I can buy the technology, I can buy the project, I can buy your product, but if my end users are not adopting it, this is a fail, and then someone can fire me.
Yeah. People feel internally like they're gonna be able to keep their job. Maybe they'll even get
Most
promoted
probably
if
they want.
I yeah, but it's just such a there's so much difference between that approach and unfortunately an approach I see, which is in some places, some categories, the vendor just drops off the product and they disappear.
Yeah, and that's not
And
good.
that that, that's just it doesn't show affinity in terms of truly relating to the end user and the buying committee.
Yeah. There are exceptions, like with the approach of product-led growth, but product-led growth are typically products that are not demanding behavioral change, right? That's when you can do product-led growth and then have a really good onboarding videos and onboarding elements in the user interface. A very familiar user interface should be something that has all their affinity elements, right? So at the end of the day, is building most of the affinity elements. But yeah, I am very used to market complex products like Microsoft custom products and things
Yeah,
like that. And the most critical elements to make a product a success, to make a project a success, it was the adoption piece. It's not
yeah,
just how are you building the product, what's the core technology of the product, but is how are you going to educate 10, 50, sometimes 500, 1000, 1500 users
yeah,
to use this product. And by the way, you're going to see how the internal adoption of this new product is going to follow also diffusion of innovations.
right.
And you got to leverage that. So
Yes.
for this kind of products, provide videos, provide support, provide that the customer success team that is going to help them realize the value, the end user support on how your product works, even elements in your user interface that are guides, everything in order to drive more adoption and even KPIs. Like, for
Y
example, Microsoft, I don't know now, but 5 years ago, they were using two KPIs to understand what were the adoption rates. And they had two KPIs. One is activation of your software, but the other one is the use of the software. And,
yeah,
and then one thing is that, okay, one user has joined it by the first time my new software or my new product. But if they're not coming back as
yeah,
expected again and again, that means they are not adopting it. So we have a problem.
yeah,
Now, if you are not matching a threshold in which your adoption rates are 80%, which means most of your users are not adopting the product, you gotta provide support, you gotta provide videos, you gotta provide ways to drive that change management. That's change management. That's behavioral change, and you gotta provide support to that. Otherwise, your solution is not going to be adopted by the end users, and the product is gonna fail. And that's not a good case you can use for the next client.
yep, exactly. Yeah,
Let's jump to the next one,
yeah,
Warren. We have
yeah.
two elements more.
Okay, so alignment, and this is one that, is a personal favorite of mine, and maybe you've heard a saying which is, "Less is more." Less is more. All right. So essentially what that refers to is and this is especially true in the mainstream is when you have people in the early majority, late majority, they're basically buying a product to either solve a problem or improve productivity. And
Very
you know,
pragmatist
they are they're
approach.
very much and what they are interested in is in many cases, one of the features of your product. If that's all it takes is one feature and or function, then they are getting all of the value that they want. That is great alignment. But if the vendor is there going, yes, we do have that feature you're interested in, but we have 10 other features. We have this, it does this and that and
Yeah,
this, and we could you should think about these things. And we have more features than our competitors. And guess what? That's trying to essentially sell value that the end user is not interested in at
hasn't
all.
curse.
And in fact, many of the features that the vendor is pushing, they just get in the way. They make the solution or the product more complex, and it doesn't match up with what it is the customer thinks of when they say, "I want this value." It's one dimensional, so it's
Yeah,
less, not more, and that changes over time. You really absolutely have to calibrate your product so that the value you deliver is exactly aligned,
yeah.
and that's an element of affinity.
Fantastic. And then what you can do is a land and expand approach in which, yeah, you can solve more issues with more
Sure.
features or more services, but don't sell me everything at once. It's aligned with my value, one use case for my particular problem. Then once you gain the trust by solving that problem, then you expand with more services, solving another use case, selling me another feature.
Yes. Yes. So it's constant readjustment of what it is you offer, when you offer it, who do you offer it to, but you can match your value delivered to the value required.
Yeah. And here, I think this is an example we came across or I share with the audience in one of our chapters. But real quick, it's the Microsoft example on how to market this 5, which was or is, well, right now the name is Microsoft 365, right? It's all their cloud package, their public cloud package with SharePoint, with Word, with Office, with OneDrive, with Microsoft Teams, and with Exchange. Maybe most of our audience doesn't know that Exchange exists there, but it's not only part of the package, but it was the main product that they were marketing and trying to sell when they launched Office 365. They were incentivizing all the market and all the partners in order to enter with Exchange. And why was that? Because everything else was unfamiliar, was
Yeah.
not a problem to be solved for
Right.
the end user. And the problem to be solved was the system administrators. They had this big issue with emails because every time the email was down, they had the email on premises, in their premises, and every time the email was down, the CEO, the highest paid person in the company, will complain and will say, "Hey, system administrator, what are you doing? What I'm paying you for?" Right? It was
Right.
huge pain. So they wanted to get rid of that and saying, "Oh no, this is on the systems of Microsoft. It's not me anymore," right? So Microsoft, instead of marketing the entire stack of Office 365 with all those features, they were no. We're gonna solve this problem in Exchange. And once we solve Exchange problem with the system integrators, which by the way, sorry, we win the system administrators, which by the
Yeah.
way, they own the entire cloud infrastructure, not cloud by that time, of a company, then we expand. And then we expand into SharePoint, we expand into OneDrive, and we keep selling other plans and licenses. So
Yep.
that's the way.
Yep. But and it's at the customer's pace. The customer decides when it's time
Exactly.
to, and they don't want to be covered and overwhelmed by dozens of features that they're not interested at a certain time. Yeah.
Last one,
Yeah. And
trust
then
channels. We used to call it familiar channels.
yes, yes. And it really, I think trust is a key phrase. And I'll go back to the example in radio broadcast when I was helping that company just get started, and they were using a
I'll
reseller
tell
of
you what. It's sorry, Warren. I would be interested, and I think that for our audience would be also interesting to learn because I believe that COVID vaccination was super successful in
yes,
Vermont, and I believe
convert
that
right.
one one of the elements that they were using were familiar channels. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Can you tell
Yes.
more us about that example?
Yeah. Yeah. So they did something that, a lot of other places for whatever reason they were not willing to do. And you think about getting a population vaccinated. Okay, so here you've got something that is new. They've never done it before. Is there risk? Oh, yeah, there's risk on both sides. What if the vaccination makes you feel bad and get sick? Or what if it doesn't work? What if someone with COVID comes near you and you still get it? There are all kinds of elements of risk. What they did in the state of Vermont, which was the entire program was just brilliant, was they said, "Look, we are going to we're going to make sure getting back to the one of the earlier
Mhm.
elements of workflow. First of all, we're not going to make people change their behavior. So the people in Vermont would do things on weekends. Maybe they would go to a special sporting event. Maybe they would go to a local community gathering like a fair or something like that. And Vermont offered vaccinations at those locations. You,
Wow.
where I live near Seattle, they were doing things like, we want you to go to a local airport, make a special trip, and on this
I was
airport
there by that time. Yeah,
yeah,
I remember.
yeah, they set up the runway of the airport for mass vaccinations. So that forces a behavior change. I don't usually go to an airport
Yeah.
and and drive on the runway. That's but so in Vermont, it was like they said, "Look, we will come to you. You don't have to come to us.
Make it easy, always.
Make it easy." So that's one thing that and then they did it culturally specific in terms of channels and trust is they actually had people giving vaccinations that were able to interact with people in 10 different languages. So they were culturally very tuned in to
Wow.
how it is. If someone lived in Vermont and they were originally from Singapore, they had someone who spoke that language and they
Wow.
understand the culture of Singapore.
Brilliant.
Oh, yes. And the other one, of course, is a channel of communication where a lot of places in Vermont the most trusted health provider actually is a fireman or someone who works in emergency medicine called an EMT, right?
Mhm,
Emergency medical technician.
mhm.
And those people were the trusted channel of communication because that was, if you think about in many communities, you may know the local firemen, the people who work for the fire department, the people who work for the EMT department. They may be your neighbors and friends, and they are very much embedded in your
Mhm.
they're in your local community. So
Yeah,
that was a trusted channel of communication. The people in Vermont just it was brilliant from start to finish.
excellent.
And of course they not only had the highest vaccination rates in the US, but anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world, I didn't know
Very
that.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, they had the highest vaccination rates of the entire world.
Yeah. We'll keep using this example in next chapters to talk
Yeah,
about the last 6 elements of the low-risk reinvention, because
yeah,
we have to leave it here, but summarizing for this element, trusted channel, you gotta put your product in front of the buyer by using the channel they are familiar with, they use, they trust.
yes,
And if you gotta use local channels, think about that. Probably you have to partner with someone to reach the market that you want to reach,
absolutely.
to reach the industry, have industry specific language, right?
Yep, yes,
Things like that. Think about those ways to reach your
yep,
customers and build trusted channels.
yep,
With this, we're going to leave this chapter here. Remember, this is the second series of a 3 chapter series in which we're talking about the low risk reinvention, which is our
yep,
key framework on how to reinvent your innovation, your product, make it more appealing, make it easier to buy, make it lower risk in the eyes
mhm,
of your buyer and your
yep,
market and your end user. And that means drive more sales, reduce sales cycles, win more, and spread more your product. Next week, we will be talking about the third element, which
yep.
is,
Reliability.
thank you, Warren, reliability. So your product should be reliable. We will talk about that in the next chapter, and we will be waiting for you here in the Unstoppable product. Thank you so much for joining us. And please go to predictableinnovation.com/podcast and follow us in Spotify, in iTunes, and in Amazon Music. We're in the major, let's say, platforms. You can follow every chapter every 2 weeks here. Warren, thank you so much for your time. It's
Yep,
been very
you bet.
fun another time.
Yeah. Yeah. Always fun. Always.
I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.